This is a drash about one of the most well-known and widely quoted sentences in the Torah. I was inspired to create this by our recent study of Parsha Eikev. Of course, I'm referring to the statement, "Man does not live by bread alone." This has certainly made quite a splash. You hear it all the time from many people in many different situations. And a lot of the people who use it probably don't know where it's from, but everyone seems to know what it means. Here's the common understanding. You've got bread, which is a source of physical nourishment, and you've got not bread, maybe several not breads, providing some other kinds of nourishment, and you need both. That's reasonable, and it has a lot of applications in life. Why are you reading a book, or playing a musical instrument, or going out with someone? Man does not live by bread alone. It can apply to almost anything. Maybe that's why it's so popular. Of course, so far we're quoting out of context. If we look at the whole phrase from the Torah, we can learn more. Man does not live on bread alone, but man lives on everything out of the Lord's mouth. Now we know what the not bread is. Of course, God doesn't actually have a mouth, so what does that mean? But let's come back to that a little later. Before we had the whole sentence, we had this. And now we know that not bread is something about God, so clearly it's spiritual nourishment. So now we've got this down to what I think is the traditional understanding among people who are religiously or spiritually inclined. You can find this interpretation in many traditional Torah commentaries. Now, you're watching this, so you probably agree with the statement itself. But is this what these words of Torah mean in this context? Let me point out some of the issues that raise the question. First, isn't this a bit obvious? Every sentence in the Torah is saying this in one way or another. The very existence of the Torah says this. Is that all there is here? It seems kind of underwhelming. Another problem is universality. If you happen to be eating well, this might be a welcome reminder. But if you're starving, if your children are starving, it might not be so welcome. Then, we are still a bit fuzzy about the meaning of God's mouth. And finally, if you look at it in a just slightly larger context, you begin to see a whole other way of understanding. Let's begin with God's mouth. The Torah frequently tells us that God said something to Moses, and then God's words are reported. Well, we use our mouths to speak words, so maybe that's what it means, the words spoken by God. And often these words are laws. Many translations of this passage insert words or decrees to clarify this. It's not an unreasonable interpretation, but it's worth pointing out that the Torah doesn't say that. It just says everything from God's mouth. I think words and decrees is an incomplete interpretation. There are other meanings we should consider. First, remember that God is a being that can create things with words. Yehi or, let there be light, and there was light. So you could say that everything from God's mouth means all of creation. And there's another idea connected to God's mouth in the Torah. We also use our mouths to breathe, and God is said to have breathed the breath of life into his creation. We're alive, so that's important to us. So in addition to meaning God's words, it means all creation and the essence of life within us. We'll come back to these two additional meanings as we continue exploring the phrase. So here's the whole paragraph. Take a moment to read it. He subjected you to the hardship of hunger and then gave you manna to eat, which you did not know and your forebears did not know, in order to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but that man lives on everything out of the Lord's mouth. To understand what's going on here, let's break this down into pieces, then ask ourselves what are the most important pieces, and often these are the parts we tend to skip over. Dividing this into 6 pieces, you begin to see the underlying structure. To bring out that structure, let's compress each piece for a moment. You've really got 3 segments. What God did it, why he did it to teach you something, and what he was teaching. Now, we're trying to understand the meaning of be, what God was teaching. But to understand that, we have to understand how God's actions in A lead to the teaching of B. Let's go back to the original and overlay the structure and some emphasis. What jumps out for me is this emphasis on not knowing. If you look at it, this is very strong, definitive language. Now, this is exactly the kind of phrase I would tend to skip right over. Parenthetical, blah, blah, let's get on with it. But the more I looked at this, the more I realized this not knowing may be the key to the whole thing. Let's draw this differently and more accurately. We start with hunger, and we compare 2 possible solutions, bread and manna. The Torah emphasizes 2 things about the manna. We don't know it, and God makes it. I think the implication is clear with bread. It's a contrast. We do know it, and we know how to make it. In this view, the bread and the manna are two different ways to solve the same hunger, not two different hungers. And God is choosing the manna and not the bread to teach us something. What is the teaching? The key is that God chooses the one we don't know and the one that God controls over the one we already know and the one that we at least think that we control. I think we can get a lot more out of this if we look at the whole process as a metaphor. Hunger is any problem, challenge, issue, or lack that we encounter in life every day, right? And God is saying, when you feel that way, don't just rely on what you already know. Be open to the new. Be open to what God can do if you are open. We do get stuck in our habits and our concepts, and that often brings us to the same problems again and again. Even if it doesn't, it tends to get kind of dreary. It doesn't have to be that way. We can fill our lives with refreshment, with renewal, with the feeling of being truly alive, and with the appreciation of the constant shower of miracles we live in, with the appreciation of the greatest miracle of all, life itself, every breath. To me, this is a powerful message. Really, it's all coming from God all the time. It's always new. We can always feel that newness. It's so beautiful. It's so exciting. We just need the humility and the openness to see it.